Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Yoma Daf discusses what happens when the two Se'irim, the goats of Yom Kippur, when one of them has to be replaced because the first one is lost or died or something happens to it, you have to bring a new pair. So you replace the missing one, but now you end up with two of the other type. So one of them you use, one of them you get rid of. Which is one you use, which is one you get rid of? That's a machlokes amoraim. So the Gemara will go through bringing proofs in either one, which will extend into the next daf. Now we've seen in the Mishnah that there are two Se'irim brought on Yom Kippur. There's the one that goes La'azazel off the cliff, and then there's the one that goes for Karban Chatas, whose blood is brought inside the Heichel. They have to be a pair. If you lose one of them, you have to bring another pair to replace the missing one, and you're left with two of the other type. So the Mishnah said that the second one you get rid of. How do you get rid of it? Machlokes, Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim, Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda says, like any Karban Chatas that's not used, it has to be Mesa, it has to be left to die. And the Chachamim say, no, this is not a regular Karban Chatas, this is a Karban Chatas Tzibor, belongs to the public. Something like that is not left to die, something like that is left till it gets a mum, and then you sell it and use the money to go in the box of voluntary Karbonos Ola for when the Mizbeach is empty. Now the Mishnah had said, you have two of the other type, whichever one wasn't lost, you have two of that one. So you get rid of the Shani. Gemara says the Shani, you get rid of which Shani? The Shani from the first pair, or the Shani from the second pair? Which one are you going to use? Which one are you going to get rid of? So the Gemara says that Rav says you use the first one, the remainder from the first pair, then you get rid of the second. And Rav Yochanan says you get rid of the second. So the Gemara says, what's the machlokes based on? It's based on the concept of dichoy. Dichoy means if you have something, you have a carbon, a kli, something, whatever it is, which is not usable for a short time, then it becomes usable again, does it return to really being usable? Or does the fact that it's pushed away, it's dichoy, it's pushed away from being used at some point, mean that it's pushed away for good? And even when the reason that it's rejected disappears, it still stays rejected. That's a concept which applies all over Shas. If something is rejected for a short time, it's useless. Even if the cause of the rejection ends, it stays rejected. There's a question, the machlokes between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan is, does that rejection apply to a Baal Chai? A living creature, could that get the status of being rejected? Or it's still alive, there's no actual rejection that applies to it or not. So the Gemara says, Rav holds that rejection does not apply to a Baal Chai, and therefore the second goat here, whichever one is left from the first pair, the first one was, one of them was lost, the other one is left. Even though it wasn't usable while its mate was lost, but once you replace its mate, now it's usable. And you don't say that it's permanently rejected. Rabbi Yochanan says no. It was a time when it was not usable. It gets a status of rejected and can't use it at all. Now, the Gemara analyzes Rav's opinion that it's not rejected. The Gemara says, where does Rav get this idea that a Baal Chai is not rejected? So the Gemara says two approaches. Number one, look at something which is mechusar zman, something which is not usable because it's the wrong time, like it's too young. So it's not usable in this current age, but it becomes usable later when it becomes 8 days old, it's usable. So you see, you can have something which was not usable, and then it becomes usable because it's a Baal Chai. The Gemara says that's not a good comparison. Over there, it never was usable in the first place. Rejection is where it was usable, and then something happened to it, it became unusable. That's where the concept of rejection would say it can't come back to being usable again. But it was never usable, so there's nothing canceled, there's nothing ruined. It never had a usability that was ruined. So you can't bring a proof from there. So the Gemara says, no, Rav's proof is not from there. Rav's proof is in the case of something which has a temporary mum. Something which got a temporary mum which heals. And the halacha is that while it has a temporary mum, you can't use it. But once the mum heals, then you could use it. So you see from there that it's something which is temporarily unusable. Once the cause goes away, you could use it again. So the Gemara says, how do you see that halacha? How does Rav know that that's true? Maybe when it has a temporary mum, it gets rejected and it stays rejected. So Gemara says, no, because the pasuk describing a mum says don't use it. Ki mashchasam bahem, its destruction is in it. Mum bum, it has a mum in it. Lo yiras lechem, you can't use it then. So it's only when it's mum bum. It's only when it has the mum. The mum goes away. The destruction goes away. Okay, very good. The Gemara says, what is Rav Yochanan going to do with that? The Gemara says, Rav Yochanan will say, because no, there it says extra word bahem. Ki mashchasam bahem. This concept only applies to the idea of a Baal mum. Any other type of temporary dichoy, any other type of temporary rejection becomes a permanent state even if the cause for the rejection goes away. So Gemara says, what is Rav going to do with that bahem? What's that for? Gemara says that's to tell you that the isser of a something that has a temporary mum is only while the mum is on it and it's not confused with anything else. Midaraisa, though, if you were to confuse this animal with any other animals, you don't know which is the one with the mum, then you would not have any isser at all. What's a case like that? Where after we're shechted, you found the mum, and now you don't know which limbs are from which animal. All the limbs are confused. Let's say you found the mum in the head, and then you don't know which arms and legs, which belongs to which. So then you can bring them. Daraisa, there's no problem at all. The isser is it's limited to a situation where you know which is which. And that is like the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. The Gemara quotes a Brisa, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Eliezer is a machlokes with the Chachamim. If you mixed up the limbs of a bunch of karbanos, and one of them is found to have a mum, so Rabbi Eliezer says, since it's only an Isser Dirabanon to bring it, because like we're saying, like Rav is saying there's no Isser Deraisa, because the Isser Deraisa is limited to where it's identified. Here it's confused, there's only an Isser Dirabanon. Therefore, as long as one of a certain part has been brought on the Mizbeach already, I'm allowed to bring the other ones. Because derabanan, the halacha is on any iser derabanan, if it's possible that I could say that the part which was aser is already gone, I'm allowed to bring the other ones. I could assume that the part which is gone is the part that had the iser on it. That's a concept on an iser derabanan. So here, since this is only an iser derabanan, like Rabbi Eliezer holds, like we're saying because of this gzeira, and one was already brought, I'll say the one that was already brought is the one that belonged to the Balmum, and all the other ones I'm allowed to bring. Now the Chachamim disagree with that. The Chachamim say this is an Esed Daraisa, and therefore you cannot do that concept. You cannot do what's called Taliyah and say, oh, the one that was brought already. Even if all of them were brought except for one, this one is a Safek Daraisa according to the Chachamim. Maybe this is from the animal that had the mum, and therefore the Chachamim argue on Rabbi Eliezer, and they say that since it's a Daraisa, it's a Safek Daraisa, you can't bring it. But this extra word bahem is the source of Rabbi Eliezer's halacha that, as we're seeing in the brisa here, that the iser of a mum over of a temporary mum is limited to where it's clear and you know which one it is. So the Gemara says, where's Rabbi Yechon going to learn that halacha from? The Gemara says Rabbi Yechon learns it from the fact that it didn't have to say bahem. It could have said bum, just like it says in the next phrase, mum bum. It could have said kimash chasam bum. Why do I have to say bahem? That's to teach me that halacha. Rav doesn't hold of a drasha like that. Rav says, bum, bahem, it's not an extra drasha. Okay, now the Gemara says, fine. I understand Rav, he holds that it's not pushed away. The first one is not pushed away, you could still use the first one. But why does that mean I have to dafka use the first one? Maybe I could still use the second one. After all, that's the one that completed the avoda. The Gemara says, no, Rav holds like Rabbi Yosi. Famous opinion of Rabbi Yosi, which we had earlier, that if you have two things, you use the first one. So the Gemara repeats the discussion that it had already just a few daf earlier, on Daf Samach Vez, 2 daf ago. And the Gemara says, where do you see Rabbi Yossi holds that if you have two things viable, you use the first one? The Gemara says, maybe it'll be from the boxes which you use to take shkalim out of the donation chest of Machtas HaShekel to buy Karbanos Tibur. We know that the Gizbar for the Beis HaMikdash would take from the big collection box of Machtas HaShekel, and he would take in 3 smaller boxes, and he would label them 1, 2, 3. Rabbi Yossi says he labeled them 1, 2, 3, or Aleph, Beis, Gimel, in order that we should know which one is the first one, because he wants to take from the first one. So you see, Rabbi Yossi holds that you're supposed to take from the first one, whereas says that's different. There, the first one was ready to be taken from when the second one wasn't finished yet. As soon as he filled up the first one, it's ready. The second one is not ready yet. So therefore, Rabbi Yossi says the first one's ready. When it's ready and it's the only one, it gets the din of this one you're going to use. That stays even when you fill up another one. But here, both animals, both Seirim became ready at the same time. When is that? Because even though one was around before the other one, but they weren't ready to be used until the blood of the par is already sprinkled in the Kodesh Kodashim. And by the time the blood of the par is sprinkled in the Kodesh Kodashim, we've already dealt with the problem of which goat is which. So we already have them both standing here. So they both become ready at the same time. They both become ready at the same time. You don't see that. Rabbi Yossi would say that you have to take the first one. They both became ready at the same time. Gemara says it's from something else. It's from the case of somebody who brings a korban Pesach. He loses it. He takes another one. Then he finds the first one. Now he has 2 korbanos Pesach. They both become ready at the same time because he found them before concise. And you can only bring the korban after concise. And he basically still says you take the first one, you don't take the second one. So that again is the source of this halacha, and that's what Rav holds like, that you always take the first one. So now the Gemara says there's a Mishnah and a Brisa. The Mishnah seems to go like Rav, and the Brisa seems to go like Reb Yochanan. Where do you see that the Mishnah goes like Rav? So if you look in the Mishnah, it says, if the one that was lost, if you had two Seirim, and one of them was lost, so you have to bring a new pair to replace it. So if the one that was lost was the one that was Lashem, the Karban Chatas, so then the other one replaces it and becomes a Karban Chatas. That seems to imply that as far as the Azazel ones, the ones which aren't lost, nothing's replaced. You stay with the first one. You don't say that the second one replaces it. If the second one was replacing the first one, then you should say both replace the ones from before, the one that's lost and the one that's still there. That indicates, like Rav, that you don't replace the other one, you use the first one of the one that's still around. Where do you see a brisa that says like Rav Yochanan? So the brisa says like this. When it says that I'm supposed to use the second one, I don't know, the second goat from which pair? From the first pair, from the second pair? So the brisa says there's a drasha. The Torah says Yoma Chai. The goat that's still alive should be Yoma Chai. It should stand alive. So Gemara says Yoma Chai, not the one. The one that should stand alive is the one whose mate is still there, not the one whose mate is already lost or gone or died. Where do you see that? Gemara says because it says Yomad, it should stand, not that it stood already. The goat from the first pair already stood there. It already did this Yomad Chai thing, and then its mate was lost. And now it's got a new mate, if you want to use it. It has a new mate, so it has to do another Yomad Chai. No. You're not supposed to do two Yomad Chais on the same one. Each one should have only one Yomad Chai. So the first one you don't use. This seems to imply you use the second one, not the first one. Okay, now the Gemara tries to bring some proofs. So first of all, let's look at Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah argued about two things, it seems. He argued with the Tanakama and he said that the goat that's extra, the goat that there's two of, you have to get rid of one of them. The one that you get rid of, we're discussing which one you get rid of, but the one that you get rid of, Rabbi Yehuda said is Mesa, it has to be left to die, and the Chachamim say goes till it gets a mum, and then you sell it. So the Gemara said, besides for that, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda said another thing. He said that even if the goat that was already shachted is a karban chatas, it's just a cup of blood, so it has to have a matching pair. It has to match to the Sar Lazazel, and if one of them is lost, the other one is ruined. If the blood spills, you have to bring a new Sar Lazazel. If the Sar Lazazel is lost, you have to bring a new karban chatas, even if you had that one that's already shachted and it was just blood. Now this seems to imply that a living creature is pushed away. Otherwise, why should I have to get rid of the Sar Mishalech just because I spilled the blood? I should be able to use the same Sar HaMishlech again. I'll take a new carbon, replace the spilled blood, and use the same Sar HaMishlech as before. Obviously, it gets pushed away, you can't use it anymore. That's why he says that one has to get lost. Now the Gemara says, but hold on a second. What's Rav going to do with that? So it's a proof against Rav. So the Gemara says, Rav says I wasn't going like Rabbi Yehuda. I was going in the Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda argues on that. So the Gemara says, but now there's another problem over here, and that's that according to Rav Yehuda is arguing on the Tanakama in two things. According to Rabbi Yochanan, what's the second thing? Why does he say v'oid? One thing he's arguing is as to whether the extra sire has to be mesa or left till gets a mum. But what else is he arguing? So Gemara says, well, we've already proven that the Mishnah, we've already said the Mishnah doesn't fit with Rabbi Yochanan. So the Mishnah, the Tanakama, goes like Rav. So he's arguing about this exact Yisod. You're right. Rav is right. The Tanakama goes like him. And this Rabbi Yehuda goes like me. And that's the second thing that he's arguing on Rav, on the Tanakama that explains the V'oid Amar Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara now brings the Raya to Rabbi Yochanan and rejects the Raya. The Raya is from the fact that in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda had said that it's Mesa. And the Chamim say, no, it's not Mesa because it's a Chatas Tzibor, it's a publicly owned Chatas. That implies that if it would be a privately owned Chatas, it would be Mesa. Now, this case, the reason that it's Mesa is because there's two of them. Right? Let's say we're referring to the Chatas, the Sar, which is supposed to go Lashem. So there's two Karbanas Chatas that's supposed to go Lashem. One was the original, and one is a replacement. So the Gemara is clearly saying if it would be individually owned, it would be Mesa. Now that is a machokes. So machokes in the Gemara and the Temura between Rebbe and the Rabbanan if it's Mesa or not. So how are we going to understand this over here? So the Gemara there says that Rabbi Abba says that there's a case where Rebbe and the Chachamim both agree that a privately owned chatas, where there's two of them and you have to use one, that the other one is Mesa. What's that case? That case is where you bring one of them as a carbon, and the one that you bring is the one which was never lost. That is to say that the reason you have two is because you lost one, and you you set aside another one, then you found the first one. So now you have two. So if you go ahead and you bring the one which was never lost, the replacement one, as the carbon, then the original one, everybody there agrees you can't use that, it has to be Mesa. So therefore, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that the one we're bringing here is the second one, the replacement, and the one you have to get rid of is the first one, so it's just like the case here where everybody agrees that it's Mesa, and that makes sense why the Chachamim here say that if it would be a private carbon, it would be Mesa according to everybody. However, according to Rebbe, the one that I'm using is the first one, and I'm getting rid of the second one, the replacement. In that case, first of all, there's a machlokes there, and even the opinion there that says that it should be Mesa would not say that it's Mesa here, because it's different than it is over there. Because here it's not a replacement for anything. It's not really replacing anything. The only reason why you have two of the same animal is because you had to bring a match along with the one that was lost, which was the other animal. The Sar Azazel was lost, and you had to bring a match. Now I have two of them. That's like a case where you brought two in the first place, you set aside two for a certain carbon. Over there, the halacha is that everybody agrees that you leave it till it gets a mum. Even if it's a private carbon, it's not Mesa. You leave it till it gets a mum. So how could over here, it doesn't make any sense. Why should over here the Chachamim say that the reason why it's left to get a mum is because it's a public carbon? Even if it would be a private carbon in this case, it should be left to get a mum and not Mesa. Gemara answers no. According to Rav, this is not considered like you brought them both at once, you could use either one, because since Rav holds like Rabbi Yossi, that you automatically use the first one, so the only one that you have a possibility to use is the first one. The second one you're never going to use anyway. The second one was only set aside in the first place to get rid of, because it's a replacement and you're never going to use it. So just like Rebbe, who holds it, you don't use the replacement, you get rid of it. Here also he would say, this Chachamim here would be Rebbe there, who would say that you get rid of the replacement. The Gemara now kind of repeats two kashas that it said earlier. It's a variant way of expressing the same kashas, one on Rav and one on Rabbi Yochanan. We had said earlier that our Mishnah fits better in Rav, but that Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yehuda clearly holds Balechaim Nidchin. He holds that an animal, even while it's alive, if it's pushed away and it's not usable, you can't use it anymore. We had seen that from the fact that he says that if the cup of blood spills, you can't use the Sar HaMishtaleach. That was paired with it. So the Gemara then says, according to Rabbi Yehuda, how's Rav going to understand Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda certainly says that you can't be using the first of the two animals, meaning the leftover of the first pair. You have to be using the leftover from the second pair. On the other hand, when Rabbi Yehuda argues on the Chachamim said that it could be left to graze until it gets a moment. Rabbi Yehuda said that it has to be Tamas, it has to be Mesa. The Chachamim were talking about the second pair, the animal from the second pair. So Rabbi Yehuda is then saying that the second pair has to be left to die. So what then is he going to use? He can't use the first one because he holds that it's Nidchin, and he can't use the second one because he says that it's Mesa. So Gemara says, no, Rav is going to tell you that Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with me. I'm going like the Chachamim, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda is arguing on the Chachamim in two things. First of all, he's arguing as to whether it's Mesa or it's left to get a mom. He holds that it's Mesa. And second of all, he holds that you don't use the first one. I'm going like the Chachamim who say use the first one. He's only used the second one. The Chachamim were saying use the first one. Now, the Gemara flips this, and again, a version of a kasha we said earlier. The Gemara says, according to Rabbi Yochanan, there's no two machleksin. According to Rav, there's two machleksin. We understand why Rabbi Yehuda says va'oid. The Mishnah quoting Rabbi Yehuda says va'oid. There's another machlekes. According to Rabbi Yochanan, there's only one machlekes, because they're only arguing as to whether it's Mesa or it should get a mum. But everybody's agreeing that you're using the second animal and you're throwing out the first animal. Who says, yeah, that's a bit of a kasha on Rabbi Yochanan that it should have not said.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.